Well, it's an honor to be here. For those of you who haven't gathered from my accent, I'm not a local. I come from London. I'm visiting this beautiful community of Deal. That working in London for Chazak, I was honored to work with Rabbi Shlomo Farchi for many years, and still today, his brother-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Levi. And they always tell us about this beautiful community. And it's incredible to see it in itself and feel the love, sense the importance that they stress on Torah, on Tefillah, and on community. It's a really beautiful thing. So one thing I learned, by the way, is when you're up in one of these series and you're speaking before someone and after someone, you always have to make sure you know what the person before you spoke about. I was once asked to speak in a school, in a high school, and they call me up and they say, Rabbi, we have a bit of a problem in our high school. We need you to come and help. It's a high school for people who are Shomer Shabbat, but we've been hearing that a particular year group is struggling with keeping Shabbat. Can you come in and speak to them about Shabbat, inspire them, explain to them how important it is? I said, sure. I'll do my best, see what I can do. So I was meant to be the second speaker. And I get there, and unusual for me, I actually get there early instead of late. And the first speaker, who was one of the heads of the school, he was running late. So he said, oh, Rabbi, do you mind going first? So I said, sure, no problem at all. I was speaking to a group of 14, 15-year-old boys, and I thought to myself, how can I explain to them the importance of keeping Shabbat? So I said to them, boys, you know what? I'm not sure yet what I am going to do, what I am going to tell you. But I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to guilt you into keeping Shabbat. I'm not going to talk about how we were Moser Nefesh for Shabbat, how much we've sacrificed for Shabbat, how your ancestors would have loved to have been able to keep Shabbat like you. I'm not going to guilt you into it, because I don't believe in that. I want you to keep Shabbat because you appreciate the beauty of what Shabbat is. And I gave a class about the beauty of Shabbat. 20 minutes later, the teacher, the head teacher, who was meant to be the first speaker, who now came second, stands up and he says, boys, I'm sorry I'm late. But I've just got off a plane. My plane was delayed. Do you know where I've come from? Auschwitz, Poland. And he starts going on about how people were Moser Nefesh. And the kids start cracking up laughing. And no one can understand. And the rabbis go, why are you laughing? How is this funny? And it wasn't funny. But sometimes you really need to know what the people before you have said before you start. So luckily I sat in to hear the beautiful words of my colleagues, Rabbi Mizrahi and Rabbi Bragamov. Because we're speaking about similar things, but everyone from a different perspective. And I think that's the key phrase. Perspective. The Arizal tells us that every single month in the Jewish calendar, all 12 months, have a corresponding limb in the body. That month is about that particular limb. He explains, for example, that the month of Nisan that we have, Pesach, is all about the mouth. Pesach, the mouth that speaks. The mitzvah of Pesach is all about speech. V'gadata lebincha. And he tells us that the month of Tammuz that we are in now is the month of the eyes, of the koach hari'iyah, the power of vision, the ability to see. And he says it's at the beginning of this month, Rosh Chodesh, that the Meraglim, the spies, went into Israel, Latura Ta'aretz, to seek out the land. And that was the beginning of what happened on Tisha B'Av, which was the Meraglim came back and they gave their report. The bad report, they spoke Lashon Hara about the land of Israel. That was the damage, the inability to see, the damage of the vision. It was a problem with the koach of this month, which is the koach of Riyah. The other time on Shiva Asa B'Tammuz, as Rabbi Reuven spoke about the smashing of the Luchot, the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, started because the Jewish people saw wrong. It says, Ki Ra'ah, the people saw Kiboshesh Moshe, that Moshe was late. They saw that he wasn't coming, and eventually they sinned. Again, the sin starting off with the problem of vision, a kilkul, a damaging of sight. And it's this, unfortunately, that led to the destruction of the temple, which we know came from sinat chinam, from machloket, from fighting, from disagreements, from baseless hatred. Because so often hatred is caused and machloket is started from not seeing right, from not understanding someone else's perspective. When you don't see right, when you don't understand what's before you, when you don't look deeper, you can completely misunderstand a situation. The Meraglim looked and they saw the land of Israel, but they didn't see it right. They didn't look deeper. They didn't look beyond, and that started what eventually became Tisha B'Av, a day of destruction. In fact, our rabbis tell us the end of the parasha of Shalach, where we learn about the Meraglim, we're given the mitzvah of tzitzit. Because we're told the mitzvah of tzitzit comes from the word metzit, which means to look deeper. The mitzvah of tzitzit is to remind us to look beyond. Don't just look at something on surface level, on face value, look beyond. So we have to understand perspective. We have to understand what it means when you lose perspective, when you don't have perspective. It's interesting that the two eyes that we're given are things that give us perspective. If you've ever had to wear a patch over your eye, or if you're like me and you wear glasses and you lose one of your lenses or one of your lenses crack, one of the things that you lose is depth, perspective. You can't see things in the right way because only when you have two eyes open can you really see and you gain perspective. In fact, the Chafetz Chaim tells us that the reason why we're given two eyes is because one, you're given to judge others favorably. Dan lekaf zachut. And the other eye, you're given to judge yourself a bit more harshly. But in fact, we all do the opposite. We judge everybody else harshly, and for ourselves, we've got every excuse in the book. I always use the example. Imagine it's Yom Kippur, and now we all know we're supposed to spend the whole day in synagogue, in tefillah, but it's hard. It's hard to be there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. So, especially when you're a teenager, you decide, the time that it's appropriate to go to shul. So for some people, it's 10 a.m. For some people, it's midday. Some people, maybe Nila. But whatever time it is that you decide is the okay time to go to synagogue, so you arrive. And let's say you're running a bit late, your alarm didn't go off, you couldn't find your shoes, and you decide it's okay to be there at 11 o'clock, and for whatever reason you don't get there till 11:30. But why were you late? I've got a good excuse. 5 minutes later, your best friend walks in. And you look at him. Habibi, Yom Kippur, how can you be late? For you, you had every excuse. For him, there's no excuse. Chafetz Chaim says, no, you have to have two eyes. You have to understand things from his perspective. We have this almost every single day if you drive a car. Every single day you're driving a car and you're waiting to pull out from the side street to the main street. And you're waiting to pull out and everyone's just bombing past you. And you're thinking, come on, you couldn't just wait 2 seconds to let me go? There's a red light up ahead, you can't even go ahead. Couldn't you just wait? And we're judging those people, why couldn't you just wait for me? What happens when you're on the other side? You're driving down the main street and you see all these cars waiting to come out. Do you think to stop and let them go? No, I'm in a rush, I need to go ahead, it may be a red. We always have excuses for ourselves, but never for other people. But we need to train ourselves if we want to remedy the machloket. We want to preempt and even stop the machloket from even before it even begins. We need to learn to see things from people's perspective. The problem is, when someone does something to hurt you, when someone causes you pain, You cannot possibly understand why they would do that. How could they do that? And when you're in that moment of pain, there's no chance you can see their perspective. There's no chance you can see it from where they were coming from. And in that moment, you just are convinced that the reason why they did it was to hurt you. Because pain is blinding. When you're in pain, you don't see sense. You don't see logic. You don't see perspective. If when you lose one eye, you lose depth and perspective. When you lose both, metaphorically speaking, when you cannot see because you're in so much pain, you cannot think, you can't possibly understand the other person. Try and reason with a person when they're in pain. Your kid falls over and is screaming in pain, and you're just trying to, you can't talk to them. Oh, come on, they tripped over and they're hurt, and you're in a rush, you need to go, you're trying. There's nothing you can do. When a person's in pain, they're so engrossed, so involved in that moment of pain, they can't hear anything, they can't see any perspective. For someone from the outside, when an outsider sees that moment, sees that argument, sees that pain, sees that conflict between these two people, the outsider can notice, can understand that person never meant to harm you. There ever been a situation you see two people get in an argument, you can understand that, oh, she didn't mean it like that and she didn't mean it like that, but when you're involved, you can't see. It's only from someone from the outside who can often give it perspective. But when you shift that perspective, when you do give yourself the ability and somehow overcome the urge and shift the perspective, it can change everything. One of my favorite stories I heard was about a couple who get married, and the minhag, the custom of this particular family, was that the grandmother of the khatan would buy the engagement ring for the kala. So the grandmother would buy the ring, the diamond ring, for her grandson to give to the kala, to the bride. And so the couple, they get engaged, the grandmother buys the ring, the khatan gives it to the kala, they get married, and it was around Yom Kippur. Baruch Hashem, they get married, everything is wonderful, everything was lovely, until a couple of weeks into the marriage, she loses the ring. Now, you might want to let it go by, you might not want to mention it, but she feels terrible. She doesn't know what to do. She has no choice but to tell her husband. And instead of him understanding, and okay, it was a mistake happened, he's angry, he's upset, he can't believe it. You're so irresponsible. How could you lose it? And slowly but surely it becomes a big rift between the two of them, a big fight. And they're constantly bickering and arguing about it. And then, oy vavoy, when his mother finds out, when his grandmother finds out, the whole family start making a joke of the fact that she's this irresponsible girl. And it's painful for her. It's terrible for the relationship. You know, they're at the Shabbat table and someone says, oh, pass the salt. And say, oh, don't pass it to Rivka, she might lose it. Every few minutes they're joking. And it's really causing terrible, terrible energy between the two of them. Comes along Pesach, and Ashkenazim have a minhag that on Pesach, at this Leil Seder, they wear a kittel, a white coat. So the Khatan is getting ready for the Pesach Seder. He's been married about 6 months now, and he goes to get his kittel out of the closet to see if it needs to be dry cleaned. And he puts it on, he has a look, he pats himself down, he feels something in the pocket, and he pulls it out, and it's the ring. She lost the ring, he had the ring. And he remembers that they got married around Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which is the last time that he wore his kittel on Rosh Hashanah. When she went to wash her hands, she said, oh, just hold it for me a minute. He put it in his pocket and he forgot to give her back the ring. Oh, how the tables have turned. Who's the idiot now? Who's the forgetful one? And she starts giving him everything back. For 6 months, she's been the brunt of all his jokes and his mother's jokes and his grandmother's jokes. She starts giving it back to him for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until she realizes, the women normally get this quicker than the men, is it really worth fighting? Is it really right what I'm doing to give back to him just because he gave to me? You know what? Ever since we got this ring, it's been a curse. It's never brought mazal to our relationship. It's never brought love and shalom. You know what? I'm going to get rid of the ring. I'm going to exchange it for another one. And maybe the new ring will bring mazal. But this ring, it's cursed. I want to get rid of it. So, she decides she's going to go. She knows where the jewelry store that his grandmother used to always buy the wedding rings from. And she goes to the jeweler and she says, look, this ring, my husband's grandmother bought it from you. No offense, it's a beautiful ring, but I need to exchange it. I need to get rid of it. He says, okay, fine, no problem. Let me see how much I'll give you for it. And he takes the ring and he says, no, this ring's not from me. She says, what do you mean? She says, you know my grandmother, Mrs. He says, yeah. She said, she always buys the rings for me. He says, I know. She always does. And this is very similar, but this is not my ring. And she says, I guarantee you it is. We've got the receipt at home. I'll bring it to you. And so she goes to her house. She starts looking through the file where they keep all their receipts. And sure enough, she sees a receipt for a ring, not from this jeweler, but from another one. And not from September when they got married, but from April, 1 week before Pesach. And suddenly she realized what her husband did. Her husband didn't find the ring in his kittel. The husband realized, like she did, that this ring was nothing but a curse, and that him starting up with his wife and bullying her about it, being mean to her about it, was the most terrible thing for their relationship, and he wanted it to end. She said, you know what? I'm going to shift the entire thing. She lost the ring. I'm going to take the blame. And he went and he bought a similar ring and pretended that he lost it to solve the conflict. How unbelievable that is. He realized how damaging it was for their relationship and realized that he was the only one right now that could do something about it. And they were in so deep that for him to apologize and try and make amends was too late. He had to shift the entire situation, shift the blame, shift the perspective, not on her anymore, but now on me. It's unbelievable. Of all relationships, and what we're about to discuss can really be applied to any relationship, whether it's siblings, spouse, business. But we're going to focus on marriage just for a moment. For those of you who are not yet married, put this in your memory data. It will come to help at some point, Bezrat Hashem. But we see that of all relationships, the ones that are often the most vibrant and often can be, chas v'shalom, toxic, the most energy, the most anger sometimes can be in a marriage. And yet that is a relationship that started off with the most beauty. It was the relationship that you chose. You didn't choose your parents. You certainly didn't choose your siblings. You chose your spouse. And yet, sometimes it could be fire. And in fact, the Gemara tells us, the Gemara in Sotah says, the ish ve'isha, the word ish and the word isha, zachu, if a man and woman are zocher in their relationship, if they merit to do it right, they bring shoresh shechina benehem, the shechina, God's presence, rests amongst them. Because it says the word ish and isha, the word ish, has the letter Yud, and the word Isha has the letter Hey, and those are the letters of God's name, Ish v'Isha. Says the Gemara, however, Lo zachu, if they don't merit, if they don't do it right, if they don't invest, if they don't do what they need to do, Esh achruam, fire consumes them. Because if you take God out of the picture, you take the Yud and the Hey out of their names, you're left with Aleph and Shin, which spells Eish. Fire can consume. It's a relationship that when it's done right is beautiful and it blossoms. But la aleinu, God forbid, when it's done wrong, it can be all consuming. Because when there's a relationship that you invest in, when there's a relationship where there's such a deep emotional connection between the two parties, and through investing, you've made yourself vulnerable. You've opened up. You've let that person into your deepest, darkest secrets. They know you better than anyone in the world. Then even the smallest thing can explode, can penetrate the deepest place and cause the most amount of pain. So perhaps we can discuss just a couple of ideas of how to diffuse these situations, to resolve the conflict. Obviously, these things sound really easy. And you can talk about them, and you can write books about them, and you can theorize all day long. But putting them into practice is much harder. So I apologize for making it sound so simple, whereas we all know in practice it's in fact much harder. But I think the core of conflict often is understanding that it's not the issue at hand. It's not the thing that you did or that you didn't do. It often sounds like it. We use that to blame the person, but it's not about often what you did or what you didn't do. You have to understand that it's not about the action, it's about the pain that it causes the other person. And what we do is we forget that. We focus on the action. If someone says, "Oh, I can't believe you were late," you argue back, "I wasn't so late." "Why are you always late?" "I'm not always late. Yesterday I was on time." "You never call me." "What are you talking about? I called you 3 times this morning." What happens is when someone does something wrong and you focus on that action and you start blaming, the other person is now on the defense. And by the way, we all know the greatest form of defense is attack. "Oh, I'm always late? You're always late. I've only been late 3 times, you're always late." And before you know it, the whole thing explodes. And you don't even know where the whole thing started. So instead of addressing the action, instead of addressing the problem, instead of addressing the one little thing that seems to spark this entire thing, don't address the action, address the pain. Understand that when you're in an emotional relationship, there are going to be emotions involved. A person, you're both emotionally vulnerable, and therefore things are going to hurt much more than if some random person did it to you. And therefore it's not about the action that he or she did, but it's about the pain that it caused you. And the way that you can diffuse this often, either of you can. Either the person who was pained or the person who's being attacked. One of the ways, and again, this is an ideal world if we were all robots, but in an ideal world, when we'll just use the husband as an example for the person who made the mistake, but it works both ways. But imagine he's late again. And you say, "Oh my God, you're always late." Now, if you address the action, the thing that you did wrong, you'll fight back. "No, I'm not. You are, I am," back and forth. But if you understand that when your wife was waiting for you and she had to rush, or she had to do this, or she's waiting out in the cold or in the rain, whatever it may be, how did that make her feel? How does you always being late, whether it's always or not is not the point, but when you're late, how does that make her feel? If you're the wife and you understand that men struggle to understand us when we speak, you need to try and translate it for him. Instead of saying, you are always late, try and say, I feel like you're always late. Because you've just changed your attack from a fact to a feeling. You can argue with facts. You cannot argue with feelings. If I tell you, you did X, I can say, no, I didn't. If I say to you, always do this, I can say, no, I'm not. If I tell you, I feel this, you can no longer confirm or deny. This is how I feel. You can't argue with a feeling. So if we can train ourselves in our relationships to not talk in actions, but to talk in feelings, we actually help diffuse a situation before it ever explodes. A second one, if that's a bit difficult for us, either because we can't identify the emotions that we feel ourselves, or we're not so good at expressing them, or, I'm just feeling so fired up that I can't. Do you know what you do? I've read this in 3 different marriage books, none of them each quoting the other. They all came up with this themselves, apparently. Is when someone does something to hurt you so bad, and you're feeling so hurt, but you can't say anything. And you don't want to fight. You don't want it to erupt. You know what you do? You just say, ouch. That hurt. Ouch. Because now, me, the attacker, the blamer, whoever it is, or the person who did something wrong, understands you're in pain. I don't want to cause you pain. I would never want to cause you pain. And what I didn't realize is that when I was late, or when I forgot something, it caused you pain. Oh, I'm sorry. I would never want to cause you pain. But instead of saying, ouch, instead of saying, what you did hurt me, ouch, I'm in pain, you say, you always did this, why do you do that, why don't you? There's no room for feeling. You're not even letting him or her know that you're in pain, because you're just shouting. And the final one is really hard. The final one definitely applies to every single relationship in the world. The best thing you can ever do for someone who's in pain is feel their pain. Validate their pain. Make them feel that it's okay to be in pain. And I understand your pain. It happens with kids the whole time. Your kid's walking down the street and he or she falls over and she grazes her knee. What do? You try and they start crying. You try and pick them up as quickly as possible and say, it's okay, don't worry, it'll be fine. In Israel they say, lo kara klum, nothing happened, it's okay, brush it off. Now why do we do that? We're not horrible people. We do that because you don't want them to cry and make a whole big thing out. You want them to forget about it. I don't want to see my kid crying. But you know what you're actually doing? You're telling your child who is feeling pain, who is screaming in pain, by the way, you're not in pain. It's okay. It doesn't hurt. What do you mean it doesn't hurt? Of course it hurts. And as counterintuitive as it may be, if you actually validate their pain, allow them to feel it, and you say, oh my gosh, you hurt your knee, you grazed your knee, it must be so painful, they'll get over that pain so much quicker because they felt heard. And instead of you now telling your child that they're not allowed to feel, or what they think they feel is wrong, you're saying, yeah, it does hurt. And suddenly, the child feels heard. Someone understands me. Someone knows that I'm in pain. I feel safe now. It's okay. I don't need to scream and cry out anymore because I was crying because I wanted you to know that I need you and I need you to understand that I'm in pain. Once you notice it, you recognize it for yourself. I don't need to cry anymore. And it's true in relationships as well. The more you validate, the more you hear, the more you help them understand that you feel their pain, you understand what they're feeling, the better they feel. But it's so counterintuitive. Because imagine, if you've hurt someone, forget the person who fell over. This is not a kid that fell over. This is my spouse that I hurt. So in order to validate their pain, you know what I need to do? I need to throw myself under the bus. I need to acknowledge that I hurt you. Wow, that's tough. And for sure, I don't know about women, but for sure in a man's brain, this is like the worst plan ever. For me to tell her and admit that what I actually did to her not only was wrong, but really hurt, and even validate and acknowledge and try and tell her what pain I caused her. Are you crazy? But you know what? It works. Unbelievably. Because when a person is in pain, they just want to feel understood. They want to know that you feel their pain, you understand their pain. So one of the greatest tools of conflict resolution is perspective. This is what started, what ended up being the destruction of the temple, which led to almost the destruction of the Jewish people, of who we are, the achdut, the unity that we have as a nation. And it started by kilkul, by damaging the koach hariyah, the ability to see, the ability to understand someone else's perspective. If we want to do our bit to rebuild the temple, to rebuild people, to rebuild Am Yisrael, and allow us to be united once again, don't live in your own world. Don't look at things with one-eyed vision, which has no depth and no perspective. Open both eyes. Notice the people around you, their feelings, their experiences. Validate. See their perspective. And that way, by you feeling their pain, understanding things from their point of view, Bezrat Hashem will be zocher to build together and have ultimate unity. Bezrat Hashem. Amen.